A physician, a company doctor, and a fund manager walk into a wine bar. That's our theme this week. G'day, welcome to Lunch Money. We're the home of workouts and special situations on YouTube and on podcasts in Australia until I'm challenged otherwise. Brought to you by Hermes Capital, hermescapital.com.au. Please click, share, like and subscribe wherever you are watching or listening. We've got a great lineup of panelists today. We've got industry specialists from the wine industry. We've got turnaround specialist, and we've got a doctor today. And I think we'll start off with our first guest today. We'll introduce Carl Gunther to begin with. Carl is a company director, a restructuring expert, and a turnaround expert. And he's also the current president of the Turnaround Management Association. G'day, Carl. How are you going?
Yeah, good afternoon, Nick. It's very good to be with you this afternoon.
Fantastic. What keeps you busy this week?
Well, look, I've managed to get in the water a bit of surfing in the morning, along with everyone else that is doing the same things as me. But outside of getting in the water, I'm spending a lot of time working with boards and CEOs to try and help them navigate a whole bunch of tactical issues they're confronting at this time. And that's mostly on the phone or Zoom.
Yeah. And what are is there a common theme in the issues? Is it cash flow? Is it sales? Is it just keeping the staff together?
Yeah, it's all around cash flow, and it's very much a focus. For a lot of people, it's a focus on the here and now. But I'm trying to encourage a lot of my clients to also focus on the time when they're going to have to invest in a rebuild of their business, because a lot of the value is eroded right now, but really the value will come back if they can fund a rebuild. And so making decisions now around constraints of cash to fund them in the future is key. And that to me is a recurring theme that I'm seeing.
I'm wondering, one of the perennial challenges of turnaround management as opposed to insolvency. Insolvency is fine because there's a trigger and you're insolvent, but the problem with a turnaround manager, it's always about getting in early enough. Yeah, and all that sort of stuff. I'm just wondering, with this COVID crisis, is it maybe accelerating some situations that may have been turnaround situations in 6 months' time, or insolvency situations in 12 months? Is it bringing some of those things a bit forward?
Look, it is and it isn't. Of course, what you might find, or what I'm seeing, is that a lot of the turnaround and certainly the insolvency practitioners, Nick, aren't as busy as they thought they would be. And so what does that mean? Either everyone's sitting on their hands and doing nothing, which I just don't believe. I think probably more importantly, they're probably having a go at doing it themselves. There's a lot of compliance stakeholders out there. And so, I would say that people are working on it and they are thinking about the future. I think some are sticking their heads in the sands, but a lot of the businesses that I'm working with, they are really, really focused on the future and trying to work out how they can navigate this process. So they are being proactive. They're most likely just doing it themselves as opposed to seeking advice.
Yep. And I'm also interested, another issue with turnaround management is, in the larger companies where you've got directors who aren't necessarily shareholders, they're more likely to engage turnaround external advice. But in smaller companies, it's a little bit harder to get their attention. So are you seeing turnaround work up and down the sort of the food chain?
Yeah, so the big end of town are normally well advised, and they take that advice, and it's a function of just getting advice because it's the right thing to do. And but a lot of the time, it's for a non-executive director of a large private or public company. They also want to preserve their personal position in respect of the corporation's laws. But you're right. An SME as an owner-operator, less concerned about their personal position, although that remains a high priority. It's more around just immediate tactical cash flow issues. How do I resolve this issue? What am I focusing on? How do I dialogue with my bank? How do I dialogue with the ATO? How do I look at alternative forms of finance? How do I secure the benefits that the government are passing out? So it's more very tactical and it's immediate regarding their own business as opposed to their own personal position.
I'll just ask you one more question before we move on to our next guest. I was talking to an ATO negotiator earlier this week, and they were saying with the larger companies, the ATO is moving back to business as usual in terms of chasing debt, whereas obviously there was a bit of clemency early on with this COVID thing. Now the ATO, I mean, are you seeing that?
I'm not seeing it at the big end of town. If they've secured a plan or a repayment plan or a delayed payment plan, then it's already in place and it's for a period of time. At the smaller end of town, typically the response we're getting from the ATO is a verbal acceptance of a particular deferment plan.
Yeah.
But I suspect, the time will come. Let's certainly in the 4 or 5 cash flows that I've been working with, cash is pretty good up until September, but then October is when you've got to pay the ATO. It's just a deferment of an obligation. It's nothing more. And that's when the cash flow constraint's really going to hit. And I expect a lot of businesses will put their hand up and ask for a further concession from the ATO. It's at that time that I think you'll find the ATO will be putting a line in the sand, depending on the organisation and the position they play in the scheme of things.
Look, I think the Australian government's going to have a cash flow problem sooner or later with all the money they've been shelling out. But look, well, thanks for that, Carl. We'll just put you on hold for a tick, and we'll move on to we'll introduce our next guest now. Our next guest will be Dr. John Cummins. Dr. John Cummins is a specialist physician for corporate executives. G'day, Dr. John. How are you going?
Hello, Nick. How are you? I'm well, thank you.
Fantastic. I've been very much enjoying your weekly 2-minute YouTubes. They've been fantastic. I see Dr. John myself once a year to get my my checkup to make sure that my heart isn't about to give out and I'm not losing my mental health, and he keeps me robust. And I think and he's been doing this interesting series of videos for his patients, which has been fascinating. I just wonder, how are you finding things in this time?
Oh, look, I think our business is probably struggling, and when I talk to my medical colleagues, they are as well, whether that's GPs or specialists. So I think it's an interesting situation where some businesses are doing better, but I think for the majority of businesses, profitability isn't as high. And it's interesting when I speak to, we look after a lot of business people, not exclusively, how the feeling is out there. And I think at the end of the day, I mean, you could look at there's positives in this as well. And I think some of the positives, for example, I think a lot of people are actually enjoying the simplicity of life relative to what it was before. I think you're forced to have more time. You can't go to a restaurant, you can't go to a movie. A lot of people, can't commute back to work again. And so what I hear, around where I live up in Paddington, is people playing musical instruments that you wouldn't have heard before. I hear people saying to me, look, I'm actually enjoying this life a lot better. And I think, some people will be questioning how hard and for how long do they want to chase the dollar. So it is an opportunity for reflection, but there's also suffering out there. And there's, I think we all have concerns about the suffering. I get asked a lot about how long it lasts, etc., and we can talk about that later if you like. But I think most people are confident in what the government has done. They're patiently waiting, and I think there's also some pent-up demand to get out there and get back into socialisation again, because we are a social species.
Well, it's interesting. Of course, everybody's baking bread and putting it on Facebook. I think you're referring to that a little bit. I know myself. You'll be very pleased to hear that I've had lots of time to make my Mediterranean diet salads and putting them in mason jars for the next day and all that sort of stuff.
Hey, how did you go with the fibre?
Well, just for context, Doctor does a weekly challenge. The fibre one I didn't get to. I did the different coloured vegetables, so the purples and all that sort of stuff, which is fantastic. They're really great videos. I wonder how much of all those things that you do actually prepare your patients for this sort of pandemic. I mean, it's not just about heart disease and that sort of stuff. I mean, I feel as though what you're doing is preparing people for this out of the box stuff as well.
From a physical viewpoint.
Yeah.
Nick here. Look, I actually was asked this interesting question. I think it was yesterday. So one of the things that we want to do is get people to be in the best condition they can for life in general. And clearly what we can see, I mean, you're a great example, Nick, and I've known you over the years, but your physical condition is like someone 10 or 20 years, 15 years younger than your biological age. And the question was, well, if I got COVID now, am I at risk as a 60-year-old, for example, or because my body's like a 45-year-old? And I don't know the answer to that. But I think, one of the things that we were pushing early on was come in and get your lungs tested. But that's before we stopped doing lung testing because, you could infect someone.
Yeah.
I would hope that if someone is in really great physical condition and they're unlucky enough to get this infection, that their odds of fighting it off would be a lot better. And that's the other reason we're pushing the flu vaccine is it's not the flu, but you don't want to get the flu and the corona at the same time. So I hope, we're encouraging people. Just think about your health. It's the greatest asset you've got. Yes, we've all got business and money, but if you haven't got your health, you've got nothing.
Yeah, look, for sure. All right, well, look, we'll just park you for a second. Just stay there. We'll come back in a sec, but we'll introduce our next guest. And I must say that one of the great things about Dr. Cummins is that he might fact check me on this, but he does prescribe a glass of wine every night as part of the Mediterranean diet, which is a nice segue for Peter McAtamney, who is the principal of Wine Planet Business Solutions. How are you going, Peter?
Yeah, good, thank you, Nick. Great to see you.
Just a bit of background on Peter. And Peter's, when you look at Peter's experience in the wine game, he's done everything, I guess, from from sales and through to strategic management. And now you advise wineries. I guess you with Frasier at one stage. I guess you advise them all around the world. I guess one of the things about the wine business is it's an export business. So what's keeping you busy? What's keeping you busy lately?
Well, I've been coaching my people to run fast. I first met Nick at UTS, and he got me involved in running the Turnaround Management Association education program, which was an enormous amount of fun, introduced me to a lot of clever people. And the reason I got hauled in was that the live case study that Nick was working on was Evans and Tate, which of course got rolled into McWilliams, which Carl knows all about. So yeah, that's been interesting, because when I was teaching that, we were delivering an education program around a 3-stage process. Stop the bleeding, perform the emergency surgery, and get back to recovery. Well, it's amazing. In the space of 3 weeks, we've run through the first 2, and we're already running like hell in the recovery process, because my clients have really got a once-in-a-generation opportunity to transform their business, in that wine in the digital space is going bananas, as you can imagine. Yeah. When you look at all the things that have been compromised in terms of what's there to do at home, well, sport's gone. There's not a hell of a lot on TV unless you get yourself a Netflix subscription or something. There's we're going to talk about sport a little bit later on, which I hadn't prepared for, but I'm a bit of a rugby nut. And, there's 5 times that Australia beat New Zealand, and 1 time when they nearly did. And then you've watched that and you've used up all the content, So it's a bit bleak. So people are up for a good time. And the best...
What I mean, we're all drinking like fish. Is one of the things that. So I mean, is this good times for your clients?
It is for those people that are organised. I mean, there's been a massive channel shift, right? So the on-premise, of course, has all but disappeared. The on-premise being restaurants, pubs, clubs, hotels, whatever. Retail, in order to compensate for that, I can quote you Australian numbers, but the American ones are more current and more robust. In order to compensate for that, wine needed to be up about 22%, right? Right. It is actually up over 30%. So they're in front with that. But in order to be a beneficiary, you would have to have listings with supermarkets, which a lot of the small guys don't have. So what else fills the gap? Well, digital sales are up about 3 times across all countries. So wineries are having to learn very, very fast about how to do good digital marketing. And that's not difficult because, they're generally fairly small businesses and they have very close personal relationships with their customers. And when you get an email that says, hey, we're struggling a bit, can you help us? And you're thinking, well, it's a pretty nice thing that you're asking me to do to be helpful. So sure, I'll buy half dozen bottles of your wine. It's not going to be any hardship for me. So, so there's a lot of people need a lot of help. So I've been having to, make alliances very, very quickly with digital agencies around the world who is, really get wine and, help people with that. There's more help in some markets than others. In New Zealand, they've got this wonderful concept called the Regional Business Partners Network. And what they're like is the domestic arm of what is Austrade here.
Right.
And every business gets $5,000 to help them get through this, which for a small business is quite decent. There's enough money to pay an accountant to do a cash flow, and it's enough money to pay me to tell them, how do we switch our strategy around quickly to stay alive. So
okay. Well, let's okay. Well, look, I think that we'll just bring all of the guests together now, if we can do that. Okie dokie, and there we go. Okay. All right. So I'm just interested, Carl, you heard what Peter was saying there about, I guess, people changing their businesses and becoming more digital. I mean, I guess that's something that would be very translatable to other businesses that you'd be looking at as well, both in terms of costs and revenue, I suppose.
Yeah, look, I agree. I guess to me, so long as you've got the client in focus, it can sometimes be pretty hard to change strategy midstream, particularly in a crisis like this. And so, you've got to always focus on the clients that you've already got as opposed to necessarily chasing markets. Certainly that's the advice I've got, because it's pretty hard to get a new client in a new market with a new product right in the middle of a crisis. So, and it's not to say that people aren't doing it, and the wine sector that's fine, but you've actually got to be very focused on your existing strategy as opposed to changing a strategy midstream.
Yeah. We'll move on to some news pieces here. And our first one is a little video from Gladys Berejiklian yesterday. Just watch this for a tick.
Yeah, no, I've been very open about the fact that I don't support the other state premiers closing their borders. That's a matter for them. I'd probably feel offended if they told me how to do my job. But I'm looking forward to those state borders coming down. I often joke with the Queensland Premier that I'll end up going to Auckland before I end up going to Brisbane.
So did you all hear that okay?
Yep.
Fantastic. I might start off with Dr. Cummins. Would you jump on an aeroplane at this point in time? Would you feel safe jumping on an aeroplane if they do open the borders?
Nationally, you mean, or internationally?
Oh, nationally. Let's keep it national for now.
Look, nationally, I would feel pretty comfortable, definitely, because I think the prevalence of infection is so low. And I think our healthcare system is in such good shape that I wouldn't have a problem. I think, just from a personal viewpoint, one of my biggest concerns is my mother's 88 and she's in good nick, but that's the population that we really have to protect, and so that's what I'd be mindful of. So I wouldn't have a problem jumping on a plane. I would have a very low threshold for getting tested. And I think the more the better. One of the things that we were able to roll out for our Sydney clients is home testing, where you can get a result within 24 hours. But nationally, I wouldn't have a problem, no.
That was fantastic. Yeah, I mean, you were way ahead. I got an email from you as a patient saying that you had this home testing available, and that was when people were still panicking about whether or not they could get tested at all. Carl, how was interstate travel restrictions affecting businesses as you see it, particularly, I guess, when you're trying if you're trying to give advice to a business in Queensland?
I'm glad Dr. John said he would travel, because I'm on a plane to Melbourne next week, and I'm just going to take. I figured if I'm armed with my hand sanitizer and my mask, what the hell could happen? What could possibly go wrong? In my view, there's probably more chance of the plane crashing than. No, I shouldn't say that. At any rate, I am travelling. But look, I think people tend to adapt. The reason why I'm going is because I really do need to get some FaceTime with someone. It's just better when you're in the room around a particular topic that I'm working with. But I think we're all adapting. I guess a number of my clients who have a distributed network of branches. Those branches they're still open and running. In fact, their business is they've had no material change in their business. They're functioning. What they are doing is planning in the event that they get an outbreak, and that's kind of their risk management approach. So that's kind of it. I mean, I guess if for a lot of businesses they have shut down and told people to go work from home, and people are adapting by and large.
And Peter, in your business, I guess because a lot of the nature of your stuff is all over the place in terms of New Zealand, Australia, and around the world. So do you travel a lot, or does this?
Look, I'm suffering withdrawals. I normally travel 120 days of the year. So I was listening to the news last night, and they were talking about the poor people who no longer had a job, who used to make up all the airline meals. And I was thinking, well, hang on a minute, there's a great value innovation opportunity here. I mean, there's a lot of Qantas people and people preparing those meals. I mean, you could imagine that if there was a truck that pulled up outside that was all done up like a Qantas plane, and then they get a couple of hosties to wheel the meal in. It'll be the chicken or beef, so it'll be low cost. They could charge you $10 for a beer, so it'll be high margin. They could pad that out with a lot of free samples from eager people who wanted to get this product in front of people. It'd be awesome,
Plus some wines, of course. All right, look, we'll move on to our next. One. Okay, now this just a bit of a change in tone. We've got this this JobKeeper, obviously, whatever it is, $750 a week, and it's starting to flow through. And it seems to be keeping a lot of businesses afloat, that's for sure. And now people are starting to talk about whether or not JobKeeper should be extended, or whether or not it's costing us too much and it should be reined in. But just that article on the right-hand side of screen there, a lot of jobs won't be there when JobKeeper ends. Carl, what do you think? I mean, do you think that are some businesses just keeping things going until JobKeeper runs out?
Yeah, I mean, I think. Look, it's avoided a mass panic of just complete shutdown, and on one spectrum it's a massive PR exercise by government. On the other, it's actually a bona fide means by which to keep businesses alive. I think if there aren't going to be jobs there when JobKeeper ends, then there shouldn't. If that's the case, in a lot of those circumstances, then JobKeeper should end, because the jobs aren't there in the first place, and the whole idea of JobKeeper is to try and keep the jobs in place. My sense is it has been beneficial, but my view is that there has to be an end date. People need to come to terms with how they're going to manage this process. I don't think you can keep running the economy off the back of a government welfare purse.
Yeah, well, that's interesting. What about in your sector, Peter? Are there a lot of wine businesses accessing JobKeeper, or?
Yeah, well, I think people are going to be really innovative about this in terms of how do you kick the whole supply chain along. And there was a very interesting article in the news this morning where they were talking about what the Chinese government are doing in providing subsidies through reducing the cost of goods to get those goods out into the supply chain, to get all those people working around delivering that stuff, and to get people out and buying stuff again. And every business has got to think about how they do that, how they keep people engaged, so they're not just taking a salary, but they're actually doing something. And in the US, for example, people that are working in salladors and selling wines there are doing exactly the same thing at home. And this is what I mean by digital, one arm of it. So they're not actually doing new things for new customers. They're doing exactly the same thing, but they're finding a new way to do it. But at the same time, they're keeping their skills up, they're keeping their connections up, they're keeping going, they're just finding a different way to do it. Yeah. And, this, you could argue, is the biggest risk with the whole JobKeeper thing. I mean, it's this whole thing about giving people money for not necessarily doing too much. I think every business has got to think, well, how do we absolutely optimize the use of the people that we've got on the payroll now? Because that was the idea of the JobKeeper. Rather than just simply putting everybody on the dole, how do we get the most out of people? How do we keep everyone engaged? how do we take them as close to getting the business fully operational at that end point as what we can.
I wonder, Dr. Cummins, apart from putting us on the treadmill and taking our blood samples and all that sort of stuff, you also give us questionnaires on our mental health. I mean, one thing that, you know, I just wonder, you know, what are you seeing in terms of mental health? And, you know, people maybe, you know, sitting at home. A lot of people are very busy working from home, of course, but some people aren't. What are you seeing there?
Look, I think our practice tends to draw, you know, people that are interested in their health and fairly resilient people. So I think what I'm seeing is not representative.
Right.
So I'm seeing people, you know, for example, you know, the majority of people I've seen as clients in the last 3 weeks, I would say the majority are in industries where they are struggling as well, but they're mentally robust. But I think what I would agree with Peter. There's always opportunity and danger or crisis, and I think our business has taken the opportunity to look at how can we communicate with our clients better. I think the government did a great job by putting out MBS items for telehealth, telemedicine. Right. It's always been ridiculous to me to force a person to come in for a Lipitor prescription. They've been on it for 5 years and waste their time and the GP time, etc. One of the things that I would caution, though, so I think some really great things are going to come out of this, but I think Australia's going to have a problem, very broad brush statements. Everyone's going to put on a few kilos, and everyone, I think with the alcohol perspective, and Peter or someone may not like this, but I think we're at risk of habituating alcohol drinking. And what can happen, I heard that BWS sales are up 300%, is that you can inadvertently set up an habitual pattern. And I'm not talking alcohol dependence from a physiological sense, but it can just play havoc with cancer risk and weight gain and things like that. And so I would see now as a time for more discipline in terms of, you know, I'm seeing people that have put on weight, you know, in terms of watching where your weight is, watching calorie intake, and drinking very consciously, not mindlessly. But you know, it's probably all I can say, but there is suffering out there, and I don't want to, you know, diminish that just because I'm not personally seeing a lot of it. There's got to be massive suffering out there.
I must say that, you know, getting to a point that Peter was making, I mean, I travel a lot, and I must say one of the things of not being able to travel is certainly you can build some routines into your life. We'll just move on to the next one now. Oh, yeah, this is an interesting one. So this is the Grim Reaper standing in the Centrelink queue, lining up to get the handouts along with everybody else. What's he saying there? Thought you'd be flat out. Now, Carl, we've got lots of friends in the insolvency industry, and you know, as accountants or in legal practitioners as well. And this whole crisis hasn't quite precipitated the company collapses that they were anticipating, has it?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I love this one. I think it's so true. A lot of insolvency practitioners that I'm aware of, let's face it, they're not that busy. And as I said before, I think there's quite an element of do-it-yourself restructuring. As I said, government's throwing money at businesses. So too, the banks are very supportive. The ATO is very supportive. And so they're taking on the responsibility themselves, which in and of itself is not a bad thing. But the time will come. And I suspect this is more just a case of delay rather than a non-consumption of these types of services. There will be a time when the insolvency practitioners will be busy. I've no doubt about it. And so I don't think there should be any sympathy vote. If anyone's looking for it, there's probably not going to be any sympathy vote, certainly in the next 3 or 4 months, because those guys will be busy. They just will. And certainly turnaround and restructuring professionals are busy more broadly, and they will continue to be busy. I'm busy, and I know my colleagues at the TMA are very busy as well.
Well, I know some of your colleagues at the TMA are extremely busy, but obviously those ones are involved with Virgin. Look, it's. I would say another thing. It's not just the insolvency people, but certainly special situations and workout fund managers are also waiting for the other shoe to drop. So there's a lot of stuff lining up and people talking about stuff, but certainly all these government handouts, etc., are keeping the ball rolling. What have we got next there? Okay, now this is an interesting one. I didn't Yeah, I mean, look, we could talk for hours, especially Carl, I'm sure, about whether or not you'd like to be the turnaround consultant to Rugby Australia. I bet you'd have some fun there, but we won't quite get into that. I'm just wondering about restarting sport. I understand that the West Australia Football League, the Waffle, is restarting in a couple of weeks, and so I'm certainly going to be watching that one carefully. What do you think, Dr. Cummins, about people playing sport again?
Look, it's higher risk for infection, only and particularly these contact sports, because you're in people's faces. There's exchange of body fluids, whether it's sweat, spit, whatever. And I just wonder how they're getting a Guernsey or the league in the eastern states, and what's behind that versus other sports. It seems to be fairly selective. So I think for the players' sake and for the employees within those industries, absolutely. But I'm just sitting on the sidelines, metaphorically bemused as to how do they get this far down the track in a sport where if someone's going to get corona, you would think that the rate of transmission should be a lot higher during a physical contact game like that.
But, look, they're young and fit, and there's a lot of older, unfit people sitting at home. I just wonder if it's good for the mental health of society.
No, look, agree, but look, I think the whole get out of jail card, I think, is going to depend on, is there a vaccine? Well, I think we all accept that may take 12 to 18 months, may never happen. Is there good drug therapy to manage a breakout? Well, the hydroxychloroquine, that didn't seem to work. We don't know about the antivirals. So I think it's going to basically boil on to, from a public health perspective, I think what's going to happen is the lid's going to be lifted as it is. We're going to a restaurant tomorrow night, for example, not you and me, Nick, me and my wife. And I've downloaded the COVID Safe app. Now, from a public health perspective, for me, it's a no-brainer. I don't care if people know whether I run through Hyde Park or not. Regardless, what the app is, what I think will happen is there'll be little breakouts, okay? But if public health can jump in the breakout quickly, isolate people, get others in hospital if they need to, that's how this thing will be managed in the long term. And I don't know that we have the breakout mechanism down pat yet for the league and union and AFL players to be spreading it to my my mum or other old grannies and things like that. I shouldn't say old grannies.
Well, look, there was a UFC fight the other day on what do they call it? UFC Ireland. But look, we do have a couple of other headlines to go. Before we move on to that, I'll just quickly ask Carl: Is there much turnaround work in these sporting organisations, or are they DIYing or?
Yeah, no, they definitely. So obviously the rugby union's going through some pain. I'm sure there's a whole range of advisors in with the AFL as well as the NRL. Look, I think ultimately the product will be there, but it's a very, very difficult game right now, both on the field as well as in the balance sheets and P&Ls of the boardrooms. The products themselves need to change. Just back to Dr. John's comment, I think the thing that I see out of all of this is we're expected to exercise, the punters are expected to exercise social distancing, and yet these guys can go out. To me, it just doesn't set a good example right now. And for that reason alone, I know it's an industry. I know there's jobs at stake. I know, I've often heard it, well, you see the mining industry is still mining, so why can't we still play footy? It's very different in my perspective. Okay.
All right. Well, we're just running out of time, so we'll just see what else we've got. This one, business pushed to downsize post-pandemic, and that article goes into a whole bunch of things. I mean, commercial real estate might be in all sorts of trouble. So this one really just focuses. We'll just do a quick go around on what do you think? How will business look different when we come out of this? I'll start with you, Peter.
Yeah, well, I think for my people, well, as I've already alluded to, they're going to be putting a lot more effort into the digital side of things. I don't think they'll fundamentally change who works in the business and on the business. I mean, it's a unique business. I don't think there's another one like it where you're involved in manufacturing, you're involved in primary production, you're involved in sales, marketing, and business general management. And the average bottom line on those businesses is sort of 6 to 8%. They wouldn't meet anybody that was listing's investment threshold a lot of the time, and they run them very, very lean. So I don't think that they'll change the people very much, but what those people do, I think, will change fundamentally, and the channels that they focus on and the technology that they need to make those channels work will be the most important thing going forward, because people have learned to buy stuff online, and people have formed much closer connections, through the course of this, and that's where the easy sales are.
Well, I must say, look, I mean, anyone that knows me knows that on a Friday I'm usually at a lunch table somewhere, surrounded with, with people in my network, and this is how we've had to adapt by doing this as a way of getting around people instead. Carl, I mean, what do you think? I mean, I wonder about some of those large accounting and legal firms and what their space requirements are going to be going forward. But what do you think will fundamentally change after all of this?
Yeah, well, look, I think certainly we won't need the same office space that we had before. There'll be a lot more flexibility in the way that people are telecommuting, and certainly the big firms, having just left as a partner from KPMG. I don't know how the logistics will work when you can only allow 2 people in the lift. In those buildings, they're pumping heaps and heaps of people. So my sense is they'll spend a lot more time scheduling time in the office. And only if it's necessary for face-to-face will people be there. I think that most of the time,
as a business model going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I just think that's the way it is, which has problems for commercial landlords.
There'd be some REITs there.
CBD and other spaces.
Yeah. All right. Well, look, Dr. Cummins, we're going to give the last word to you. Yeah. What not necessarily on this topic, but just on anything that we've spoken about, just for the last.
Look, I think that the world will be different in ways that we can't imagine. I agree with Peter and Carl. The only other thing we haven't spoken about is how will this play out globally? So I think there's 2 issues. We're managing it nationally, but how do you and when do you open the borders? And I can't really see that happening until you've got a 10-minute COVID off the fence yes/no test, which would be a nightmare for border security, because you've got to stop this thing from coming in. Now, clearly, every business, and probably more the large ones, are going to have a risk management strategy in place again, because it will happen again. And you watch the national borders go up, how quickly it'll be next time. It won't be a week; it'll be bang within 24 hours. And so I think the companies will all have a risk strategy around that, which may fundamentally change, how HR and how resources are allocated in the present time.
All right. Well, look, on that note, I've still got 2 overseas trips booked for the end of this year, and I'm staying optimistic. But look, the glass is half full. On that note, look, we'll wrap it up. And thank you very much, Peter McAtamney, Carl Gunther, and Dr. John Cummins. Thank you very much for joining us. It's been a fascinating discussion. And thank you to everybody who's watching live, and to those of you watching later on YouTube or listening on the podcast. You can subscribe to this on Apple, Spotify, Google Play, and Stitcher. And that's all from me. Thank you very much. Look forward to seeing everybody next time. Cheers.
Great. Thanks, Nick.